registering at the tone.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another ASUG affiliate webcast. My name is Susan Reveletto, Membership Support Specialist here at ASUG headquarters in Chicago. I will be your moderator for this event. I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to join us for this presentation. Today's webcast, Welch Allyn saves $1.2 million annually by mobilizing supply chain, is brought to you by Liquid UI. Today's webcast is being recorded. That recording and the accompanying slides will be posted to the ASUG website, and all registrants will receive an email with the link to those materials. Our speakers today are Andy Rindlefleisch, Manufacturing Systems Manager from Welch Allyn, and Brett Bradley, Product Evangelist from Liquid UI. I'd like to remind our audience members that you can submit questions at any time during the presentation by clicking the purple Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And now I'd like to turn it over to Andy from Welch Allyn.
Oh, thank you, Susan. Well, we'll move right along. First slide. This is just a little bit about who I am. Basically, I'm an electronics guy that picked up some system stuff, and I've spent most of my career in the manufacturing area. I work for Welch Allyn currently. We produce various medical equipment. We've got about 2,500 employees, 28 countries. We sell all over the world, and if you've been to an emergency room, a doctor, a hospital, you've undoubtedly seen our product. We make everything from low-tech stethoscopes to high-end monitors. And one of our new products, the Retina View, is very cool. It'll take a picture of the back of your eye, email it to a service, and then a professional will take a look at that and analyze it for any disease issues. We got started with the GUI XT stuff. Really, with SAP, we wanted to give the users a simple interface like Google, and we wanted to use fun devices like the iTouch and so forth. But what we really found with SAP, we were getting very complex interfaces. I mean, the screens have hundreds of fields on them. And, you know, a lot of them are multiple tabs. And you're using old hardware. You know, it's basically desktops, laptops. We wanted to move away from that. So we got using the Liquid UI for iOS. I just wanted to show you a few of the examples of what we've done. Our old process for emptying Kanban bins, we would take the bins, and they had barcodes on them, move them back to the stockroom physically, start up the SAP transaction, scan the bins, sequence, and do the actual SAP transaction. Well, the Liquid UI interface, it allows us to take those same SAP transactions and put them on, you know, like an iPhone. We're using iTouches because they're cheap. Now we can, with those devices, we can connect to SAP from anywhere. You know, the connection's over the internet. There's no additional servers or hardware. The connection is persistent, which is really more meaningful than it sounds. If you walk out of range and you lose your internet connection, you don't lose your SAP connection. And that's a big problem with other devices. It also allows us to take an SAP transaction and compress it so it'll fit onto the smaller iPhone screen. And we can do multiple screens into one. And we'll show you some examples of that. The iPhones, you can also read a bar on the camera, or you can use a sled. which is another add-on device, which reads the barcodes a little quicker. Let me get to the next screen here. So back to that Kanban example, our current process is like I showed you in the first screen, we'll go into SAP, we'll select the barcode option, we'll scan the barcode, that'll empty the bin. We select that empty bin, and then we hit the enter. Now, so we've pushed that to the iPhone. And what you'll see is the transaction now we can do with a mobile device, so we don't have to move the bins back into the stockroom. We've moved all the fields, if you would, into the upper left-hand corner so they fit onto the device nicely. The screen is a lot simpler. We automated selecting the barcode and the empty bins so the user doesn't have to click on that. It was kind of funny. We didn't think of that at first. And what we found was they were actually wearing holes in the screensaver. So we had the Liquid UI actually click those buttons for them. And now we empty the barcode. We scan the barcode, and it does the transaction. This eliminates any typing issues, any errors. And the other big thing is now that we've got it on an iTouch, we actually just go out into production and scan the bins instead of having to bring the bins back into the stockroom to scan. So the results are, like I said, we don't have to move the bins, which is really more significant than the transaction saving. We're saving a ton of time. We've gone from 7 keystrokes and 3 mouse clicks to 1 barcode scan. We're doing 350,000 of these transactions a year, so it really adds up big time, making a lot less errors. And the last point about saving on training costs, I think is really significant. This process is so simple now. We can literally bring in a new employee and have them up and running on this in a half an hour. And if you know the SAP screens, that's not really that easy to do with those screens. The next one, so that was a simple, the Kanban one was simple. It was a 1 screen. We're just moving up into the left-hand corner and doing a little bit of automation. The other side of this is our MFBF, where we're doing our back flush. This is quite a bit more complicated. There's several screens. If you make a mistake, it's very easy to make a mistake. It's very hard to correct. And we've pushed this all into, from multiple screens, just the user having 1 front-end screen that they have to fill out. So the current transaction, like I say, you had several screens. And the funny thing with SAP is it seems like they never put anything in order. You fill the quantity out first, then the material, you've got stuff all over. Then we have to click on the save. Then another screen pops up where we just hit the enter. See here. Then we've got to click this 1 button. If you click the wrong button or you hit the enter, the transaction gets hosed, which is a thing of beauty. Oops. Way here. you've got to hit the save again, another screen, then yet another screen pops up, and finally you're done with the transaction. So what we've done with Liquid UI is we've taken all those screens and all the fields that we're entering, which you can see is just 5 fields. We've put them on one screen, front-end screen. Then the Liquid UI in the background takes that data, moves from one screen to the next, and fills all the data in for us. We're able to scan, these fields, and then the JavaScript, the Liquid UI, handles all the other screens for us. This is eliminating a ton of errors, and every error in SAP creates a lot of time. So what we've achieved is we've gone from like 22 keystrokes to doing one scan. With a beautiful front end. This has saved us a ton of time. We're doing about 150,000 of these transactions a year. We make a ton less errors because you don't have to remember not to hit the enter, to hit this, to hit that. The JavaScript just fills it all out for us. And I think the time saving is significant, but the elimination of the errors is actually even more beneficial. And then the training costs, once again, how long would it take you to teach somebody how to use this screen versus going through all the SAP screens? I just wanted to show you quickly, here's the process that Welch Allyn is using, our manufacturing flow. Basically we're entering orders, goes through SAP, purchase and demand drives back to the suppliers. We receive the material in, issue it out to production. Production's driven by a build list. They produce labels. When we're done, we're doing the back flush. We're doing the shipping transaction, and finally the box gets back to the customer. This is pretty much what probably everybody does. Here's the applications where we've used Liquid UI to make our life in SAP a lot easier. First, we've taken the MeGo GR from being 5 or 6 screens to a single screen, and we're using the Liquid UI to drive print and labels through an Access database. Plus, if we have a hot order, we'll email the buyers that the hot order came in. And this has all been enabled with the Liquid UI. We're using the Liquid UIs, the iPods, as we talked about earlier, to scan barcodes on our Kanban bins to replenish the production lines. We're scanning using the mobile devices. We're printing the Kanban pick tickets. So once we scan the bin empty, it'll actually print a TO ticket, a pick ticket, for the stockroom to pick the parts. We've got a scale interface where we're using the Java code. We'll actually scan the material when it comes in, grab the piece weight from SAP, and download it into our counting scales. So the scales will automatically get set to the piece weight. If there is no piece weight, when we do our hand count on the scale, we'll take that piece weight and upload it to SAP. So this is kind of neat. We're actually using the Liquid UI to do a, if you would, an electronic interface. We're printing product labels out on the production line with the iPods. We've got the MFBF that we talked about. We took multiple SAP screens and created one single screen transaction. We're using the iPods and ship-in, they actually pick customer orders and ship them, which has given us a lot of flexibility. We're interfacing, when we have new products, we'll actually take and put the products on a dimensional scale. So it'll take the dimensions of the product and the weight and upload that into SAP. We've automated emailing spreadsheets to the supervisors for our build list. We've automated the generation of spreadsheets for our forecast and our schedule agreements to suppliers. And that's really been great because it keeps the suppliers a lot more in tune to what our needs are. And with giving them the forecast information, they've got the ability to keep up with our demands. We've got, one of the things with SAP is on the Material Master update, there's a ton of fields. We want the buyers to be able to update safety stock, lead time, and so forth, but we don't want them to update the other fields. So using Liquid UI, we were able to let them have a screen where they can just see the fields that they need to update and not the other fields. That eliminated the need for us to do a Z transaction. So that was a substantial saving. Here's what Welch Allyn feels we've saved at an annual basis, about $1.2 million. And I think that's really understated because what I'm looking at is the transactions and how much time and hours we've saved per transaction. I think it really underestimates the amount of errors we've reduced, and even more importantly, how much less training we have to do. So that's really, that's a wrap of my presentation. Are there any questions we should hit right now?
No, I think we're going to wait till the end. Ben, did you want to go ahead and take the reins?
Sure. I'll get started here. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to share my screen. So, my name is Ben. As I said, I'm the product evangelist here with Liquid UI. And what I want to do now with the remainder of the presentation, and thank you, Andy, for telling that story. I think it's such a compelling one. We're going to add a little bit more color to idea of what Liquid UI is. We're going to talk about usability. What is usability? What does that mean? What does that mean in the context of supply chain management, kind of building off of some of the picture that Andy has already painted for us. We'll look a little bit more at supply chain management pain points and the ROI associated with beginning to address some of those pain points with usability or automation or mobility initiatives. And we're going to look at some of the common barriers to change that we see for folks who maybe want to move down this road, but there's resistance for some reason or another. And then kind of close the loop, look at some of the marketplace offerings in terms of usability, mobility, automation, to try and differentiate, and basically just as sort of a helpful guide, orientation for anybody who's interested in this kind of stuff. And we'll close out at the end with the Q&A. So getting started, what is Liquid UI? Well, if this diagram represents the out-of-the-box relationship between end users and SAP, you can see that really folks are just interacting with the raw SAP, raw unfiltered view. A little rough around the edges. Maybe there's a lot of noise, especially for the average user. The Liquid UI it's really a user interface platform. It sits right on top of SAP, and it basically delivers what users need from SAP on their terms and where they need it. So it softens the edges. It makes SAP more approachable. So now let's move on to usability. What is usability? I like to use a car analogy because I see buying a car as not so different in terms of motivations from buying SAP. You're at point A and you want to get to point B, and a car represents an easier way to get there. You can carry more stuff. You can get there faster. So therefore, I think a lot of folks, when they go in on SAP, they think they're getting this, the complete car, when in reality, what they're actually getting is something more akin to the engine and the drivetrain, the frame of the car. So these are the mechanical tidbits. These are the things that are going to do the heavy lifting, and they're really important. But the problem is that for the average user, this is really difficult to approach and really realize any true value in. So now comes this idea of usability. If we layer on top of that machinery things like a seat and a steering wheel, gas pedal, suddenly the power of this underlying machinery becomes accessible to anybody. So really, therefore, a usability-enabled SAP, as we say, is something that basically delivers the value that was originally being sought in the original purchase. You're getting the complete vehicle. So just to kind of rehash that, usability then, it's this concept of making business functionality both relevant and accessible to end users in the context of their lives and jobs. And that last part is really important. In the context of their lives and jobs, this has to be, a usability solution is something that is relevant to reality, right? It situates itself in the actual day-to-day of end users. And then the second thing we want to define is this user interface. And these are the elements with which an end user interacts in order to access and control business functionality. So back to the car analogy, this is the steering wheel, these are the seats, these are the gas pedal, and the brake pedal. So that is to say the usability is really a paradigm that we're after here, and user interface is a tool with which we can realize that paradigm. So moving on to talk about a few pain points. Andy's already talked about quite a few. Here's a diagram that represents the general supply chain management flow. We're all familiar with this. These are complex processes. And the reality of this stuff is that pain is real. As much as we can wish it to be otherwise, things happen, and the system gets clogged up. We've got backlogged purchase requisitions, stockouts, inflated safety stocks, missed shipments, etc. And because of the complexity of these processes and the dependencies, errors made upstream have downstream ramifications that ultimately can impact the customer. Obviously, what we want to avoid. And despite what technologies and intelligence might be embedded in a supply chain, the reality is that if SAP is supporting your supply chain, then end users are touching SAP throughout, and end users are the folks who are facilitating these business processes. And so those touch points become really important. And the cause of that pain, in large part, can be attributed to these touch points. And that looks like, things like paper-based tracking in a warehouse, or manual data entry, which is just ripe for data entry errors. The transactions themselves are complex. They're difficult for an average user to navigate. Oftentimes we see that there's only a few capable users in a user pool who can complete these complex transactions. And then on top of that, a lot of these transactions are happening in high volume. So the point here that I want to make, and this is what we found over the years, because users are so important in facilitating these processes, is that users really drive ROI on SAP. And this is sort of the crux of where usability enters the picture. So now let's talk about ROI, and we'll talk about some of the barriers to adoption for usability solutions. So here's just a few recent examples. These are our own examples, recent customers of ours, people who touch supply chains in one form or another. So we typically couch ROI in terms of productivity improvements and in terms of cost savings. And you can see some examples here. Advanced Energy, for example, is in their materials management module. That was an example of they're having to process these complex purchase requisition transactions, and there were only 2 folks who could actually do this without making errors and in a reasonable amount of time. And what would actually happen is that the purchase recs would get backlogged because these folks wouldn't be there every single day. And so that had cascading effects down the supply chain. So by addressing the usability of SAP at that point in the flow, they were able to realize $100K in quarterly savings per user. Welch Allyn, we just talked about, saved about 50,000 hours per year, which translated to about a $1.2 million annual savings, and so forth. And so, this type of ROI is one aspect of it. And another thing worth calling attention to is that our usability solutions, on average, pay for themselves in 90 days. So it's a pretty quick turnaround there. So now I want to talk about some of the barriers that we see that come up for folks who want to address usability, who want to mobilize elements of their supply chain. So here's your supply chain. Here's SAP usability, and what gets in the way. What we commonly see are things like, well, our infrastructure isn't ready, or decision makers don't see or know the pain. They don't understand the pain firsthand of the users. And back to that idea of users driving ROI here, a lot of folks who are making these decisions, they might be aware that there's friction somewhere in the system, but without seeing firsthand what it looks like to actually complete these transactions in SAP, it's hard to really wrap. It's very abstract until that point. Another thing that we hear is that other market offerings seem free, or they may seem inevitable. So we'll take a minute here to address some of these barriers. Talk for a minute about market offerings. So some common market offerings, we're just going to focus on 4 today. SAP's Fiori, Screen Personas, ABAP, and Liquid UI. Now these are all, these are sort of more major market offerings. There's more than this in the marketplace, but we'll focus on these for today. And the point that I really want to make here is that there's a time and a place for each of these. One is not necessarily standalone superior to the others. And I think a lot of people get hung up on which is the right one, and it's a complex process. So I just want to kind of do a very high-level, quick pass at addressing some of that complexity, and hopefully it's helpful. I'm happy to talk more about it afterwards. But really, the 4 questions that we have to answer are: what specifically are our users doing on SAP? Where will they need to access SAP? What technology resources do we have access to here, or what technology resources will we need to find access to? And what does our SAP roadmap look like? So let's just quickly walk through each of those 4 questions, starting with what will users be doing? Now, by that I mean what kind of transactions are they doing? We'll talk about 3 categories of transactions. High volume transactions, which are things like work orders or notifications. These are things that happen back to back to back over the course of the day. High volume transactions. Dynamic transactions, these are ones like creating a sales order. Anybody who's done that knows that it's a complex process. You're juggling several different SAP modules and perhaps even different software platforms like CRM platforms. Inputs in SAP are contingent upon data coming from these different platforms. It might be customer information. It might be stock information. So these are complex workflows. This is really heavy-duty stuff. It's not user-friendly stuff. And then low-volume transactions are lookups, things that you're doing once or twice per day. So we'll contrast that with the second question, which is, where will my users need access to SAP? And the question here, really, in the context of supply chain management, is how advantageous is it to have SAP be mobilized for certain of my end users? And based on your answer to those 2 questions, you can start to see which of these solutions may be more appropriate for your needs. The third question we're going to ask is, what technology resources do we have access to, or will we need to gain access to? So side by side, the four solutions are all built on the same application layer, and this is just another way of saying the out-of-the-box SAP. We differentiate once we start stacking on top of that, and we see the different layers of technology that are required to support these different platforms. Now, on top of that, we'll add just a little bit more information here. The red stars indicate areas where resources are required. These are layers of the stack where you basically need a dedicated resource to architect this and maintain it. Now, for some folks, this is an easy answer because these resources are already on board within the organization. But for others, these are resources that need to be identified and mobilized in order to do this. The other thing in this diagram that I'm pointing out is that Fiori, Personas, and any work that's done in ABAP, anytime, so these solutions are all tied to a kernel version, which is to say that whenever SAP, you need to upgrade your SAP or any kind of software patch is issued, that there's testing that needs to take place and potentially a redevelopment effort in order so that the solution is still workable. On our end, as Andy was mentioning, the development work is all done in JavaScript. And for those not technical folks out there, that just means it's a higher level scripting language versus the ABAP or OData work, which is that tends to be lower level programming stuff. So it's heavier duty stuff. The JavaScript is really lightweight stuff. And then the last question to ask is, what does our SAP roadmap look like? So Fiori and Personas address SAP versions, which are the most recent SAP versions. You can see here ECC 6, Enhanced and Fact 7 and above. And really what this means for those who are entertaining these types of solutions is that unless you're on those newer versions of SAP, then that solution does not address you. And basically, it takes work to get to the point where you can actually support these solutions with your architecture. So that's one sort of major point here, is that there's a lot of the SAP customer base which is unaddressed by these solutions, just purely on a compatibility level. Now ABAP, because it's part of the core stack of SAP, that's kernel agnostic. That type of work can happen regardless of what version of SAP that you have. And the same with Liquid UI. The difference there is that any work that's done in ABAP is tied to a specific version of kernel, whereas with Liquid UI, changes can be made in the back end, and all it requires is some light duty testing to make sure that the solution is still viable. So it's important to get clear on what the plan is for SAP, where we're at now within the organization, what we can and cannot support, and what our plans are for moving forward to newer versions of SAP, when that happens, and what if we need to address usability prior to that point. So kind of just to tie that all together, examining the true costs of all these solutions is it's work, but it's important to do. So we'll contrast the 4 offerings with implementation cost, timeline, maintenance cost, and training here. Just throw out this matrix. Now, Fiori and Personas are both touted as being free, and while on a certain level it's true, the software is free, there is commonly a lot of cost associated with getting that software up and running, and that's what's not, I think, easily appreciated. And this kind of builds on what we were mentioning earlier in terms of resources required to support these solutions, as well as this idea of the SAP roadmap. Where are we now, and what's it going to take for us to be able to support these free softwares? Now, in a situation where the resources are available and the roadmap aligns with the usability roadmap, then these solutions can be great. But it's just something to bear in mind. Liquid UI in general tends to be, as a usability platform, tends to be far less expensive, and the turnaround time is very quick for Liquid UI. Just a few example transactions here. We can turn around things like a VAO1, create sales order transaction in about 10 days. So hopefully that's helpful in terms of starting to differentiate some of the market offerings. Just quickly want to talk about Liquid UI, give a little bit more context here. So Synactive, which Liquid UI is the product, Synactive is the company. We're founded in 1998. Our co-founders worked for SAP, and while there, they developed a deep appreciation for basically the potential for usability improvements within the SAP GUI. And so they developed GUI XT, which is a legacy product of ours. and it's actually something that's been bundled with SAP since 1998. So if you use SAP, you actually already own one of the core aspects of our technology. And since that time, it's just been sort of a constant stream of building on top of this idea of working on top of SAP and helping to improve the usability of the SAP software through the user interface. And then also over the course of the past 17, 18 years, we've been privileged to partner with over 1,000 thought-leading companies and done a lot of really exciting work with these folks. So with that, I want to, I guess, pass it back to Susan, who I think is going to help out with the Q&A, and we can start to field any of the questions that folks have.
Okay, yeah, we can get started on the Q&A. Let's see, thank you, Ben. So if anyone has any questions, now is the time to submit them using the purple Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. So let's get started on some of these audience questions. The first one is Liquid UI similar to GUI XT, i.e. the next generation of GUI XT?
Yes, the answer is yes. So Liquid UI, GUI XT was, as I was saying, was the original product, and it's actually baked right into SAP. And for the last 7 years or so, we've been sunsetting the GUI XT product and have built on top of it to create more of a platform model, which is the Liquid UI product. So the idea is the same, and a lot of the core technology is the same. We've just expanded upon the functionality and really with a focus on serving the enterprise and with a focus on performance. Liquid UI has taken the place of GUI XT. And also, one more thing to add there, that the Liquid UI scripting work is done in JavaScript, and that's different than what the scripting work that was done in GUI XT. So Liquid UI is open source now.
Thank you. Andy, have you considered simplifying SDP 94? What was the experience or results?
Yes, we're actually using the old transaction MC94, and we're using the old GUI XT technology. We're downloading all the information into an Access database. We're downloading probably about 150,000 data points. We've got about 3,500 SKUs. And then we're putting it into Access, so the user has a lot better user interface. We've got statistical tools that we put into it, graphs, and so forth. So the user experience is a lot better. Then when they're done manipulating the data, we're using GUI XT to upload it back into SAP. And it's kind of nice because, like, if you're using SAP to get a whole view of the part, you've got to look through a lot of screens. With the Access database, we're looking at the previous year, current year, and next year forecast information all at once.
Okay, thank you. Andy, why did you choose to use iPods?
Nobody will steal them. just kidding. They're cheap. It's commercial electronics, so they're very cheap. They're reliable, and honestly, nobody wants them. And we were able to put the barcode sled on them. So you got a real cheap device that you can walk around production and do SAP transactions. That's what we thought was really cool with them.
Thank you. And what technical resources were required to develop and maintain the solution script, Sandy?
That's kind of a great question. I mean, I think Ben talked a lot about it in his presentation, but from a practical standpoint, the big Liquid UI developer we have in-house is our shipping group leader. He's a pretty sharp guy. He's got high school education, no college, and he's been writing all the scripts. So you don't really need high technical. In the JavaScript, it's nice because there's a record feature. You hit the record button, record a transaction. You look at the JavaScript, it's very similar to Visual Basic script, and typically you can pretty much figure out what you want to do without needing some high-level ABAP or high-level technical. And then the other thing we do is, once in a while, if we can't figure out what we want to do, we'll just get on the horn with the Synactive folks. They're usually great. You can buy the consultant hours fairly cheap, and it's a lot cheaper than trying to develop something in ABAP.
Thank you, Andy. Next question is, our users use demand planning, TXN like SDP94 a lot, and require Excel to do some what-ifs. Does Liquid UI offer a better experience doing it side by side?
Oh, yeah, I would say it's dramatically better. I don't know if you want to expand on that, Ben.
No, Andy, I can let you take that one.
The thing we find with SAP is it's a great database system, great security. You know, you've got all those features. But really, when you want to start doing the what-if stuff, you can't beat Excel. And we're actually using it, the Liquid UI, to pull stuff down into Excel and then send the spreadsheets out to our management for reports or to the suppliers to give them is a poor man's EDI. But the competency level in Excel is much higher than in SAP, both for the users and technically. So I think that's really a big reason we like it.
Gotcha. Thank you. Next question is, how easy is it to add function keys to screens since workers may have gloves on?
Yeah, you know, one of the things I've done with it is I've put push buttons. I've got about 30 of them on the side of my main SAP navigation screen. And it's like one line of code. So then if I want to go into a transaction, I've got VA01, MMBE, CS03, VA01. I've got all the transactions, and I just push the push button, and it pops me over to the SAP transaction. The other thing I've done with the push button, which is really cool, is I've got one where I hit a push button, and it'll pop open Excel for me. And like I said, it's literally one line of code.
Thank you. Next question. How did you baseline error improvements with Liquid versus the old way?
Would you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The error improvements?
How did you...
You know, and that's one of the things we didn't really do a lot of metrics on it. So it's more anecdotal, and that's why I don't have, like, you know, we're saying we're saving 1.2 million. That's all transactional time. I think the error improvement is actually bigger. So I think between simplifying the screen so you can't screw it up and barcoding and enabling it with the Liquid UI, I think it's almost as much as the time savings. Well, we haven't got analytics on it.
Thank you. And is there a benefit of iOS over Windows CE portable scanner?
Yeah. We had the Windows CE portable scanners before, they're very expensive. They're probably, the ones we had were Honeywell. They were about $1,800, and they were about $600 to get them repaired. Using the iPod stuff, we were literally, they seem to last a lot longer, and when they do break, we just throw them out because they're only a couple $100 to replace.
Thank
so
you.
I think the big benefit is cost.
Okay. Thank you for that, Andy. Next question is, with Liquid UI, can customers build new custom apps in functional areas other than SCM?
Yeah, I mean, we've used it. Okay, go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I guess I'll answer quickly, and then Andy, if you have any extra color to add, you feel free. The answer is yes. Liquid UI on iOS and Android, the Liquid UI app is literally just a portal to the SAP GUI, but now on your phone. And then once you get into any of the JavaScript customization, then you can start to define custom processes using any of the transactional information that is ready, that is available to you in the SAP GUI. So really, it's the possibilities are only limited by how many different configurations you can make within SAP transactions. There's really no limit, and that spans across all modules. So really, any business process. This is not isolated to supply chain management.
Yeah, absolutely. Any SAP transaction can benefit from Liquid UI.
Okay. Next question is, if this is built on GUIXT and at presentation layer, I assume this means that any SAP delivered change could have direct impact on your solution. How do you therefore handle Service Pack and Enhancement Pack, or even SAP notes that might change screens?
It's funny because with Welch Allyn, we've got a ton of these applications out there, and we've been up on SAP since 2005, and we try to put a new version in every year. We try to stay one or two versions behind. We've never had to really rewrite a GUI script or a Liquid UI script.
Thank you for that, Andy.
Yeah, that's great, Andy. Sorry, Susan, just to add a little bit more color there. A good way to think about this is that Liquid UI sits right between basically the end user and SAP. So if you use SAP GUI, the idea with Liquid UI is that the scripts are basically filtering the screen rendering information before it hits the screen. And so in situating ourselves there, we're not amongst any of the back-end logic of SAP. We're only working within the presentation layer, and as a result, it means we're very lightweight, and for any of the back-end changes that need to be made, upgrades and so forth, that we're for the most part unaffected by those. We tend to recommend some light-duty testing, but as Andy was saying, they've hardly ever needed to touch a GUIXT or Liquid UI script.
Yeah, what I like to tell people a little less technically is SAP with the barcode and the Liquid UI, SAP thinks you can type really fast.
Okay, guys. The next question is, the line seems to be blurred between the process improvements versus mobility. What makes Liquid UI a better solution than SAP's Persona and Fiori solution?
My own view is the Liquid UI. It's a lot simpler. You know, you don't need a technical person to write the scripts and execute them. So we don't have to wait in line behind the IT folks to get something accomplished. And I think if you saw in Ben's earlier slides, the Liquid UI stuff will cross all your needs. So you just need to learn one tool. And that tool with the JavaScripts is a pretty, I shouldn't say simple, but it's a lot simpler tool than the SAP tools. And SAP typically, you know, everything they come out with is pretty complicated. Ben?
Yeah, I agree with everything that you were saying, Andy. And again, this, you know, it gets back to some of what I was saying earlier. It depends on really what your needs are, what your users need of SAP, where they want to be using SAP, and what kinds of transactions you're doing, because each platform has its strengths. I mean, if you're talking Personas doesn't do mobility. Fiori does. Fiori is not so much a platform approach; it's more of a process-specific approach. And also, you know, the Fiori applets, it's an HTML-based technology, so it can get really slow depending on what you're doing. So I think, yeah, like Andy was saying, one of the things that's so powerful about Liquid UI is that it really kind of slices across a lot of these different areas, and it can be a one-stop shop really for process improvements and or mobility. You can hit both at the same time. There's no need to kind of silo solutions based on you know, really anything.
Thank you, Ben. And the last question to wrap this up is, how is Liquid UI better than Fiori?
Sure. So, I mean, that's kind of along the same lines as the question that I just answered. It's not necessarily that one is better than the other. Again, it depends. It depends on what you need. It depends on resources you have on board, what your SAP roadmap looks like, what your end users are going to be doing. I think there's a lot of situations where if people are set up for it, Fiori is a great solution. There's what we see a lot is that folks who pursue Fiori because they're under the impression that it's free, oftentimes hit embedded costs along the way, and you know, that is what ultimately can sort of pull them into conversation with us, and where our value becomes apparent.
Thank you for that, Ben. Thank you, Andy, as well, for a great webcast. On behalf of ASUG, I'd like to thank Liquid UI as well as all of you who took the time out of today to attend this webcast. Once again, the recording and slides from today's program will be posted to the ASUG website, and all registrants will receive an email with the link to those materials. With that, I would like to close today's webcast. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining.